Hey, I'm not sure if I can explain this the best way, and I'm sure some of you might think it's fake, but honestly, I don't care. What matters is that I know what I experienced, and so did everyone in my family. We moved into that old countryside house on the outskirts of town back in 2012. Right from the start, something seemed off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first. It all began with small things, footsteps echoing in the hallway at night, shadows moving behind the windows when nobody else was home, and an unexplainable chill seeming to emanate from the attic. Despite fixing up the interior and replacing the roof, strange incidents started happening, like the oven knob turning off by itself, something that had never happened before. Additionally, we began hearing strange sounds coming from the basement, leaving us with a constant feeling of unease. One night while we were having dinner in the kitchen, we heard heavy footsteps approaching from the hallway. My heart started pounding as I looked at my family, searching for an explanation in their scared faces. No one dared to investigate the sounds, everyone too fearful of what we might find on the other side of the door. Another night, I was lying in bed around 11 o'clock when I heard heavy boots approaching my bed and then leaving. At first, I thought one of my brothers had put on my boots, but they were in the living room, and my boots were in my room next to the closet or the lounge. After a minute, I got up and asked who had come into my room to check if I was asleep. They all looked confused and said no one had been there. Then I felt a chill run down my spine. We heard sounds like footsteps coming up from the basement with no one there. It always felt like you were being watched without eyes. Our attic, which we didn't know we had, we heard sounds from there, but we passed it off as maybe rats or something. Once my older brother was with us, and we heard knocking coming from the chandelier on the ceiling. The basement lights would randomly turn off when they were on. One afternoon, we decided to explore the attic, which had been closed for years. Upon opening the door, we were greeted by an intense cold and a smell of decay. My hands trembled as I inspected the old boxes and abandoned objects we found up there. What kind of people had lived here before us? And what secrets did this house hold? The lights began flickering for no apparent reason, and the appliances would turn on and off by themselves. My brothers started having recurring nightmares about a dark presence lurking in the shadows of the house, and every night, when I closed my eyes to sleep, I felt a sense of oppression in my chest, as if something were watching me from the shadows. One night, my sister was in the kitchen and found a chair in the middle of the room. So she thought the boys had gotten up and moved it, so she moved it back to the kitchen. Well, when she left the kitchen into the hallway, the chair started moving back across the kitchen again, and she didn't care to run back into the kitchen. This happened a few more times, with that chair sometimes being knocked over. Want to hear some crazy parts? Well, one of the beds that was in the place had stains on one of the sheets, along with additional information that the neighbor told us about the place. He told us that something tragic had happened to the man who owned the place. We were never told before when we bought the house that the old man who lived there had done some crazy things. What happened in that house before we arrived? I can say with certainty that there was something sinister lurking in its dark corners. And even though we no longer live there, the memories of that haunted house still haunt me in my nightmares. I remember that Thursday vividly, when I returned home after school, exhausted and with my mind filled with thoughts. I was only 11 years old, but in our family, we were always taught to be independent and to look out for each other. Upon arriving home, I headed straight to my room, eager to escape the hustle and bustle of the school day. My mother was still at work, and my older brother, a passionate musician, was at a concert in the city, promising to return late at night. However, what happened that afternoon would change my perception of reality forever. Upon waking from my brief nap, I was met with an oppressive darkness that seemed to envelop the room. In the corner of the room, a shadowy figure loomed, with a presence that sent chills down my spine. I tried to ignore its presence, convincing myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. At that moment, a shiver ran down my spine as the shadow began to take form, morphing into the figure of a hunched old man dressed in tattered clothes. His eyes gleamed with a supernatural intensity as he stared at me, as if he could see directly into my soul. I tried to move, but I found myself paralyzed with fear, unable to tear my gaze away from that terrifying being. He just stood there, staring at me, breathing heavily as if he were one of those creeps trying to scare you at the end of the street. Well, that was him. I swear it felt like hours as I listened to him breathe heavily, inhaling and exhaling. I turned my head towards the dark corner of the room, where the figure seemed to grow in size and malevolence. I felt a chill run down my spine as the presence drew closer and closer, like a hungry shadow in the night. It was only thanks to my brother's sudden arrival, unaware of the disturbing series of events that had unfolded in his absence, that the dark presence vanished, dissipating into nothingness like smoke in the wind, leaving me trembling with fear in my bed as my brother approached to console me. Although I tried to explain what I had seen, he simply shook his head in disbelief, attributing my experience to a mere hallucination. But I knew that something malevolent had been lurking in our home, waiting for its chance to sow chaos and fear in our lives. Since then, I have tried to forget that fateful afternoon, but the memory of darkness and fear still haunts me in my deepest dreams. Now, at 21 years old, I realize that some things simply cannot be explained by logic or reason. There are forces in this world that transcend our understanding, lurking in the shadows and waiting for their moment to reveal themselves. During high school, one of my friends lived in a house that was undoubtedly haunted. The house was at least a century old, and our city was located in a very wooded suburb. He and every member of his family had experiences there. Several of our mutual friends also had their own experiences, and I had mine too. Honestly, it would be impossible to try to summarize it in just one experience, and I think it's worth sharing the accounts I can remember. I'll start with the least terrifying, fortunately, my own, and then move on to the ones worth telling. My parents went on vacation, and for a few days, I stayed at my friend's house. Let's call him Josh. I slept in Josh's room on a sleeping bag on the floor while he slept in his bed. One morning, I woke up feeling a cold hand caressing my arm, only to wake up and find the room empty. I immediately thought Josh was pulling my leg, as he often did, but I turned to my right, where he was sleeping, and realized he was completely asleep. I said what, thinking he was joking, but he didn't wake up at all. He was totally asleep. Then I realized, I still realize today, like someone touched my arm and Josh was totally asleep. Josh also had other experiences in that same room, some of which I remember vividly. He told me that sometimes he saw someone standing in the closet in front of his bed, both asleep and awake. For a while, he told me he suffered from sleep paralysis consistently. He would wake up with a feeling of suffocation and see something dark and oppressive on his chest, as if it were being crushed. He felt pressure on his head and heard voices whispering his name over and over again, as if they were trying to control his thoughts. Interestingly, his sleep paralysis decreased significantly as soon as he moved from that place. The basement was terrifying as hell, but I can only think of one thing that happened there. It was more like a storage basement than anything else. We still used it for parties and just to hang out, but it was so full of things that entire areas of the room were completely blocked. At some point, Josh's family organized a day to throw away all the old stuff, and Josh invited us to help. I arrived that day to help, and after emptying some boxes from the basement, Josh's father said to me nonchalantly, "You can see the secret room." It turns out that in a distant part of the basement behind a pile of mess and old things there was a small door that went unnoticed by careless eyes. I think not even Josh was aware that it was there. We investigated that day, and inside we found a bunch of old dusty things. I don't remember everything exactly. I don't even know if Josh's family knew what things were, but among everything, I specifically remember finding a vintage mirror. It was kind of cringe. You know, like the one from The Ring, or I don't know. But it had a creepy aura. We decided it was creepy and we didn't want to have anything to do with it, and we left it in that closet. Well, on a different day, when luckily I wasn't there, Josh heard a crash in that specific part of the basement, found the Ring mirror and decided to play around with it for a while. I'm not lying, but he said that when looking at this ancient mirror their reflections were distorted and caused fear, and after looking at themselves in the mirror for a while, they began to smell a rotten smell in the air. They felt dizzy and weak, as if the energy had suddenly drained from them. Scared, they stopped looking at themselves in the mirror and ran up the stairs, leaving the basement as fast as they could. A couple of years later, one of our skeptical friends had his own experience. Josh often organized parties back then, and we used his basement to avoid any noise complaints. So we were all in the basement having a good time, and this particular friend of ours decides to go upstairs to get another drink. Keep in mind that this friend is not the type of person who gets completely drunk. At most he'll have 1 or 2 beers. So for all intents and purposes, he's sober. He goes upstairs and the upper floor was completely empty since we were all in the basement. Just behind the kitchen was the backyard, a huge patio with a space for breakfast or a small outdoor gathering. The kitchen had a giant glass door that allowed you to see outside and inside. He grabs the drinks from the kitchen and when he's enjoying a beer, he sees a woman sitting outside at the breakfast nook. He knew something wasn't right because the figure seemed blurry and was outside, alone, looking in. He looked away for a moment and, upon looking back, the figure had disappeared. A few days later, he shared what happened with Josh, who revealed that he and his brothers had also seen this woman a few times. That's when our friend became a believer. Josh and his family traveled periodically and had someone taking care of their 2 dogs. One of our mutual friends went to do just that one day. When he arrived that night to feed the dogs, the house was dark and empty. To put it into context, the dogs were being fed near the kitchen, and adjacent to the kitchen was the dining room, which led further towards the entrance. Our friend was in the dining room and heard a crash in the kitchen. Determined to see what had happened, he found one of the kitchen chairs knocked over on the floor, as if someone had done it. Well, he ignored this and put it back in place, returned to the dining room, and just when it was almost time to leave, he heard another crash in the kitchen. He ran out immediately after he entered the kitchen and saw the entire set of pots thrown on the floor. After that, he called Josh, told him what happened, and he laughed and said yes, sometimes things like that happen. Before my own experience, I thought Josh was trying to fool me when he told me about these other experiences. Most of our other friends thought the same, thinking Josh was lying. Even after my own experience, I sometimes thought I might have dreamed it too. But then, some of those same friends, some of them complete skeptics before, had their own experiences, and that changed my whole idea of the house. That floor, the second floor where Josh, his parents, and 2 of his 4 sisters slept, was scary. His mom once opened the closet in her room and found the same little boy standing there, looking at her and asking for his mom. I found out about that when I was in high school and it always gave me chills. It's always more terrifying when adults see them too. Upstairs in the house were the bedrooms. It was scary. I remember having strange feelings there. One of his sisters claimed to see the ghost of a little boy in the bathroom. This is the last one I'll share, as it's the story that has impacted me the most over time. One time, Josh's sister was in her 2nd floor bedroom. She was home alone, quietly reading a book, when suddenly she heard footsteps coming from the hallway, as if someone were running. At first, she thought it was her brother or her parents coming back earlier than expected. She remained glued to her reading when she heard the footsteps again, this time outside her door. She saw as the doorknob turned and waited for her mother to come in to ask or tell her something, but nothing happened. Intrigued but not scared, she decided to get out of bed and see who was in the house. She went through the entire house and found no one. Finally, scared and confused, she decided to go back to her room and lock the door. However, as soon as she opened her book again, she heard a soft and chilling laughter that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. She jumped out of bed and ran out of the house. I think Josh tells me he went to one of his neighbors' houses to wait for his parents to return. In the evening, when the family reunited, she asked if anyone had been in the house, but nobody was. She was more bewildered. She never stayed alone again. The next morning, she told her family what had happened, but none of them could find a logical explanation. Yes, that place was definitely haunted. They finally moved from there. Crazy. I remember working at a hospital. It was quite a bustling place, especially in the critical care area. Some days, I had to work long shifts, and strange things would happen. You know, in a place where people suffer pain and spend their last days, things can get a bit heavy. One particular room definitely had something odd going on. In that room, the lights flicker, mostly when you turn them off, like they give a little jump, if that makes sense. Sometimes, patients complain about someone whispering hey or breathing in their ear while they're trying to sleep. Patients spend more time in that room than any other. Most claim to see her in various places in the room. Generally, we on that shift dismiss these things. Many people spend their remaining days there. It's the closest room to the nurse's station, and most patients are critical. When pressed to describe her or who she is, they don't say much. Some just point in a direction and say her. When they dare to say more, it's usually in the present tense, as if she's there. We all want to think that the flickering lights are just power surges, faulty wiring, or bad bulbs. People hearing things or seeing things is a common phenomenon when they're in this place, so I say it's the brain preparing itself. Not a true ghost. One night, I was doing round. It was around 1 a.m. I passed by that room. The lights were off. The door was closed because no one was inside. I passed by again around 3 a.m. and the door was slightly ajar. The bedside lamp was on, and the curtain was drawn around the distant bed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the silhouette of a person standing through the curtain. I heard a voice calling me from inside, whispering my name softly. At first, I thought it was my coworker playing a prank on me, but when I gathered the courage to push the door, to my surprise, I found no one there. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of what had just happened, when an inexplicable sense of terror overcame me. The lamp in the room flickered. Whoever I saw through the curtain wasn't there. A shiver ran down my spine, and a sudden feeling of dread engulfed me. My hearing became very acute, and it felt like things slowed down with my vision. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, and it seemed to take what felt like an eternity to look back towards the door. The bathroom light that was off then pulsed, fluttered like it was trying to come on. I bolted out of that room like a rocket towards the nurse's station. My coworkers were there. I told them what had happened. They laughed and joked that I shouldn't be sleeping on the job. We decided to go back to the room to investigate. The light was still on, the curtain was open, and the bed sheets were thrown to one side, as if someone had hurriedly gotten out of bed. I was accompanied by my coworkers for the rest of the night, but then I was back on the day shift. To muster the courage to enter that room again, I eventually joke with some prayer that makes me feel blessed. I tried to take things with humor, but deep down, I'm still scared.